Hey, folks, and welcome back to the Women of Water Get Real virtual summit, where we were talking about how and why we're leaking women from the water career pipeline, how to get them back, how to keep them in the pipeline, how to create a good pipeline for all of us, how to create an environment that really supports women. And I'm very excited about our next speaker right now. We have Beverli Marshall, who I've gotten to know through a number of the water conferences, has really become outspoken on a very particular area that women in water are working in. Beverli, welcome. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited that we're having this conversation.
Yes. And where are you joining us from?
I'm sorry?
Where are you joining us from?
I am joining you from the somewhat sunny Southern California.
And you have become a real spokesperson for neurodiversity in water, right? And how water utilities in particular can address and ensure that we're providing a place for neurodiversity in the workplace. And we're going to talk about that today. What are some of the benefits? How is it showing up differently for women and men? And so we're going to get to that in a minute. But first, give us a little picture of your career history and how you got where you are today.
Well, interestingly, I did not start in the water industry. So I know that non-traditional paths is a conversation that comes up often, especially for women in the water industry. And I actually started out just in general government after getting my master's in public administration. And I have worked for special districts, for cities, county, statewide. And in 2009, when the economy tanked, I had an opportunity to transition from a city into a special district. And it just happened to be a wastewater district. Never even really thought about wastewater, water, anything, like your typical person, no idea. And the more I got into it, the more I realized I could bring my passion for the public sector and merge that with my sort of passion for the environment that's always been there and bring those together. And I have just loved it. It's 13 years now. And I started as in the business side of it. And then I had the opportunity to become a general manager for a wastewater agency. And I've been doing that at that level, at the executive level for almost 7 years now. And so for me, having sort of that business background, that broad spectrum background has really been beneficial because I don't have just a single view. I don't have I came up through operations or through engineering or the lab. I'm sort of a broad view. And I think that's given me a very different perspective of the industry as a whole. But that passion for it is there. And I absolutely speak on that. Anytime anyone will stop for 30 seconds and I can talk to them. And especially in Southern California, where, housing and water are two of the biggest topics, and they're tied intimately together.
When we started Water Citizen, I call it people passionate about water. And there is that, you get that water bug and it's like, you want to talk about, you think you want to hang out with other water people, and to be able to do that virtually as we're doing here today. And by the way, for all of you watching, go ahead and type in the chat, where are you coming from? What's your water story? We want to share all that together through this virtual summit. So you rose up to becoming general manager, and where did it come in to your life as far as think that maybe something a little different? I think in general, one thing that's come up over and over again with all the women we've been talking to is that, to be in these fields or to be in these organizations, sometimes women are a little different. I think we're willing to go into a more male environment. We're willing to, or we have that passion, that commitment for, working in water and the environment and serving the public, and it kind of takes that willingness to step into this arena, right?
It very much so. And I will tell you, I'll be very frank, there is, especially in the water industry, in my experience, there is still a very strong, thick glass ceiling. And so envisioning myself as an executive was actually something I always wanted to do, because I went and got my master's in public administration with the idea of becoming a city manager. And so sort of going up that path and getting to that executive role was always in my mind. But I really was challenged in this industry specifically because in general, executives at any level of government are women, are very, very lean. There aren't a lot of us. I can't remember what ICMA's most recent estimation is, but it's like 20% at best. And in this industry, it's even less. And part of that is because, and I just heard this again like a week ago, which was, wow, I just realized that most of the GMs are engineers. So when we're looking for our next GM, I should be looking for an engineer. And I'm like, no, you should be looking for a GM. But because fewer women in STEM, and so that narrows the field, this idea that that's what you have to be in order to be successful or to bring something to the table, when women in general are underrepresented in STEM fields, and especially engineering. When you couple that with we manage differently, right? And there's been lots of studies about women manage differently. I can't tell you how many interviews I went on where everybody's like, oh my gosh, you're perfect. You're exactly what we need. And the next thing I'd hear is they hired an engineer. They hired an engineer. They hired an operator. And since so few women, and only about 15% of water and wastewater operators are women. And it's about the same percentage for people of color. And so when you look at it from that perspective, I have a cohort at another agency who called it male, pale, and stale. Because it's, mid to late 40s, male, white. And that is the industry. So is there any big shock that there aren't a lot of women at the top? And then even boards that have women on them, it's like managers look, act, feel, sound like this. But that's because that's what we think of. And until we challenge ourselves to ask the question, why? We are not going to break that. And I tell people, and they're surprised, 50 applications, 50 interviews before I get a job. 50. And I'm not unqualified. I'm applying for jobs I am solidly qualified for. 50.
Yeah.
Before I get one. And when I go back and I ask recruiters, why? And inevitably, it goes back to the tried and true, comfortable with XYZ. It's supposed to look like this, act like this, sound like this. And that's really hard to break.
Yeah. And it's definitely, it's tough to try to compete. And then especially if there have been delays because, we may run into a situation where, we can't advance at one place and we have to start over someplace else, or have family obligations or personal health issues or something that we have to step out and then trying to get back in. And then before you know it, you may have a hiring manager that's younger than you, and then there's that aspect as well. Yes.
And I will say, especially because this industry is very STEM centric, we as a whole, and I think you've heard me talk on this, that people think of managers as doers. And so they default to technical. And the thing is when you get to the executive level, you're really a generalist. You're really managing resources and people, which is not technical. And what's really interesting is those are feminine centric things. Managing relationships, managing resources, managing people and issues. Those we tend to think of as feminine qualities. And yet, when it comes to being an executive, somehow we think men are better at it, which doesn't make sense.
You know, we actually did one of the very first studies. I'll share this real quick. One of the very first articles we did when we came out with our news site is this where are the women water leaders? And it, you know, it wasn't intended to be a controversy. It was just asking the question, where are they? You know, what utilities have women water leaders? And we want to talk about this. Oh, we're gender, you know, we don't see gender, we don't see race, we don't, you know, we're scientists and engineers. But without having that baseline, without counting, you know, that which doesn't get counted doesn't count, right? So I had started with a interview with Pat Mulroy when she was head of Las Vegas, and she was head of Association of Metropolitan Water Agencies at the time. We were at a conference together, and as soon as she finished, you know, I said, "Hey, I'd like to interview." And as soon as she finished speaking, she grabs me and said, "Let's go find a place." We see this little conference room with a closet in the back, and we just sat there for like 45 minutes, and you know, and talked about all her favorite things. And then I actually asked her about the experience of being, you know, probably one of the first women in water, and we got in touch with you know, some of the folks you might recognize from AWWA, with Jeannie Bailey, with Katie McCain, with Elisa Speranza, that, you know, that were some of the early leadership. And then, you know, and then we were going into the next generation. And you raised that point about being engineers, that a lot of the early ones had come up through things like finance for Pat Mulroy, things like government relations, PR, like Elisa Speranza. And then you had people like Alan Forrest and sort of that next generation. You did start seeing more engineers coming in. And then you also have the labs. The labs was another way, especially for smaller utilities. You might see someone come up through the labs. But absolutely, you know, it's starting to shift a little bit, that there are more places that say, oh, wait a minute, we're not just running a plant. We have to meet all of these EPA regulations. We've got a lot of government relations stuff going on. We've got a lot of outreach meetings that we have to do. We've got to be able to handle labor and you know, other HR kind of issues. And you know, and financing, trying to, you know, get bonds cast and everything, get some money for these big infrastructure projects. So yeah, you're starting to see more non-engineers than there used to be, but for sure there's a bias, for sure.
There most definitely is. And when I talk to people and I'm interviewing, I say, well, if you like what you've always had, then keep getting what you've always got. And if you want to make a change, you have to challenge yourself when you are asking someone to have this experience or this management style or education or background at why. Why is that? And I will tell you that, you know, to sort of dip my toe in my other area, which is being neurodivergent, is that it's the same thing, is that we don't want to say, oh, you know, picture a scientist, right? That great movie. We have this image of a leader. We have an image of an executive. They look like this, they act like this, they talk like this, they think like this. And when you're someone like me who is neurodivergent, I don't, I will clearly state, I do not think like everyone else. But that's not a bad thing. And in fact, if you look at some of the greatest entrepreneurs that we have currently, a huge number of them are neurodivergent. And there is a lot of research that shows the reason for that is risk-taking, creative thinking, and problem solving are inherent in some of those neurodivergent conditions. And so because of that, is it chicken or the egg, right? Are we drawn to being executives and innovators and things because we have that piece of our brain? Or is it that it sort of becomes successful, right? That self-fulfilling prophecy. And so not really sure, but they do know that there is a very strong connection with that. And so because of that, we really do have to challenge ourselves into the type of people that are drawn to certain fields. So one of the things that's recently come up is the president's most, in fact, I think it was announced yesterday or today, the executive declaration that all of the federal government will have these equity measures. And it's to make sure that the number of people in the industry, in each of those fields, it matches sort of what's in the industry, matches what's in the environment. So if we have 30% of our population is X, then we have to have 30% of our people in that department, in that field, be the same. Which, if you think about it, that doesn't match, because just looking at the way people think and what they're naturally drawn to, it is going to make that challenging, because are you going to be forcing people into roles so that you meet a certain thing, or you have an expectation? So one of the things that I talk about when I talk about neurodiversity is, and I talk broadly about the fact that people that are on the autism spectrum typically like things that are patterned. They like finding patterns, solving puzzles, looking for those kinds of things, and they tend to be
right here.
I'm preaching to the choir, but they also tend to be very methodical and logical based and rule based and pattern based, typically. And so they are naturally drawn to work fields that appeal to that. So we see a larger percentage of them in things like engineering, STEM, science, any of those kinds of things, software development, programming, because those patterns speak. It matches some of that thought process. There hasn't been a lot of studies on it, but I would say there are probably more people who are of an ADHD type of neurodivergence that are probably in sales, because it's a very high energy.
They're all over the place. Yeah.
All over the place. They tend to be entrepreneurs because they're just go. You very big picture thinking. They have to be everywhere all the time thinking different things. And they can't just say, I only want to focus on one thing. And creative problem solving, looking at the world in very different ways. And so because of that, it would be death to me to put me in a scientific STEM regimented type of position. I would just shrivel up and die. It would be the worst thing forever. For just everybody would be miserable. And asking somebody who might be on the autism spectrum to do the kinds of things that I do, coming out and speaking in front of people might be very difficult for them. Dealing with change and chaos might be incredibly upsetting, whereas I live for it, right? So saying you're going to have X number of people doing a certain thing, I think can be just as off-putting as saying it's supposed to look or act or feel a certain way. And we really have to challenge ourselves to match what we need, and not say how we're going to get it. So and I think the industry really struggles with that, And we haven't moved the needle a lot regarding women and people of color, because I think in our minds, we are not challenging the why. Why do we look for this? Why do we ask for that? And I think that's keeping people out. And I will tell you, I've hired a few, very few, but I've hired a few women into operations and things. And the difficulty is it's really hard when you're one of something. I recently had an African-American lab analyst, and she and I talked one day very, very openly about her difficulties in the industry. And she said, you know, she shows up at a training session, and she might be one of very few women and probably the only woman of color. And she goes, you know, I'm confident in myself, but it's really hard day after day and look around and see nobody that looks like me. I have a lab supervisor who she really wants, God help her, she wants to be a GM someday. And so I matched her with another woman GM who came up through lab. And I said, here's a mentor for you. Because her path is not that it's going to be identical, but it's going to be helpful because she faced some of those same challenges coming up through the lab as a woman. And so I said, she might be able to help you to deal with that. And I don't think we do enough of that. It has to be intentional. Now, my mentor was a man.
Right.
And he didn't get a choice. I said, you're mine. You're my mentor. But what I really appreciated was he had a very different view of looking at things. And he was also very honest with me. So I could ask him, where do I need to strengthen myself? How do I need to present myself in this industry, specifically water? Because here's what I'm hearing. Here's the struggle that I have. And so he was really able to say, well, Beverli, you have to learn to speak the industry, because they've got to hear that technical. It doesn't mean you have to be technical, but they have to hear the technical. That gives them comfort, and it feels like you know what you're talking about. You have to use that technical terminology.
Right.
Because without it, they just don't believe that you know what you're talking about. And I go, wow.
When I went from doing engineering to doing online media and trying to, translate what we do into things that people could understand, there were people who suddenly, it was as if my IQ had dropped 100 points. And what we're talking about is groundwater, which is water under the ground. And it's like, that I worked on a National Academy of Sciences Study Committee at Aquifer Storage, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And we absolutely. And there's, or that you're not corporate enough, or that you're not, speaking at a conference and things like that, that unless we do it in this very monotone, the same way our professors did it, and have the big long titles to our papers that are a bunch of technical gobbledygook, instead of saying, hey, this is what we're talking about, and it slowly is starting to shift some, but there's still pockets of it. Now, we were going to talk a little bit also about, when it comes to neurodiversity, and I think we've kind of established that there's certain aspects to working in this field that is attracting people who are more neurodiverse. And, the attention to detail and the systems and the, some of the antisocial aspects of sitting and working modeling all day or doing design, working out in the field, how men and women who are neurodiverse, whether they're on the spectrum, whether they're ADHD, often present differently, may be diagnosed differently, may not be diagnosed at all, especially men, if they're succeeding in math and science and they're making lots of money as an engineer, why they don't need to get a diagnosis. We call these disabilities. But if you are able to succeed, how are you disabled, right? So there's no, accommodation other than, oh, my wife takes care of all the social stuff. Oh, my secretary takes care of she's the gatekeeper, right? Or hire an engineer and say, oh, you're a woman, you must be good at communications. Why don't you deal with the clients? I'll do all the technical stuff.
Yes, and I will say that in my just to out myself here, I did my doctoral dissertation on neurodiversity in the workplace. So just I know a little bit of what I speak, and so that is true. In fact, women typically do not get diagnosed until high school or perhaps even college, and sometimes beyond, depending on how severe the symptoms are or the way the difficulty they have with education, unless they're comorbid with some other thing like a learning disability. They typically get caught in the learning disability net. Whereas boys typically get caught in the behavioral net.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where they go, oh, they're not interacting the same, so let's pull them over here. Whereas girls in general tend to be more social, just in general. So they may be less social than their peers, but more social than the boys. So they must be all right. There's just, quirky Susie, right? And so because of that, they typically don't get caught until it gets to the point where that masking or finding workarounds no longer works. Right. And that's when they either have a complete breakdown, and then find out that way, or like me, have a child that they pass it on to. Here's a gift. And then in help, like me, helping my daughter maneuver through this system and figure that out. One day I decided to take the same test, but for the adult, and found out, where did it come from? Me. Right. And so there I was, 45 years old, having hit my head against this wall for all these years, being told, why can't you? Why don't you? Why aren't you? And then the light bulb went on, and it was, how did it go so long? And part of that was because we didn't understand the conditions, and autism spectrum is very problematic because much like ADHD, a lot of the check boxes and everything are geared towards boys.
Right.
And so we know we're different. And in fact, when I did my dissertation, I had to clarify, I am going to use biological male and female because it is genetic, because it is physiological. It is tied to our DNA. It is tied to our chemistry and our biology. So in that case, I do talk about it from a sex-based, not gender-based issue. But if you have differences in gender on top of that, that intersectionality can make it even more difficult, because that's one more box you don't fit into. Or as I say, the square peg in the round hole. And so people just keep trying to shove that square peg into that round hole, and it's never going to fit. And so when you have that intersectionality with role expectation, like you were saying, oh, a female is supposed to be good, Susie Cruise director, and so we're going to give you those light, fluffy assignments because you must be good at it. That just compounds a problem that's already there. And then if you want to really throw someone for a loop, add in that they're not identified or diagnosed. So they may not even be, and when I finally told people, what the response was? You didn't know that? Like everybody diagnosed me but me. But yet But yet people would still say, why can't you be like this? Why can't, well, because I physically can't. Clearly, if I could, I would have by now.
Yeah.
So that challenge on top of it, along with gender role and expectations, and then a whole other interview on mental health issues. That'll be another time. But there's a comorbidity with being neurodivergent in some fashion and mental health, and they don't know if it's because it's genetic as well or created. Because if you get
Right.
told you're wrong,
Right.
your entire childhood, do you develop anxiety, depression, and then you get to the workplace and you get told, don't bring that to work. I will tell you, even though I wasn't in the water industry at the time, I had severe postpartum depression with my second daughter. And I didn't know what to do with that. And I was in an executive role at the time. And I felt like I couldn't say anything to anyone because I was already being looked at differently just being a woman. And I actually had the CEO at the time say, well, do you think she's going to come back after she has the baby? Well, yeah, why wouldn't I, And so the last thing I wanted to do was to talk about the fact that that adjustment was very difficult. And so women have all of these different things just rolling around. And if you're in an industry where it's you already have expectations that you need to act a certain way or behave a certain way, it's very difficult to then out yourself and say, I'm having trouble fitting in with that.
Mm-hmm.
Or to interview for a role when you think, am I qualified? I don't see anybody else that looks like me. And so
Right.
because of that, when you say, where are they? Well, are they not there because we haven't made them feel safe and comfortable? Were they here and they didn't feel like they fit in, so they left?
Mm-hmm.
These are questions. And even as women, are we making space for the next generation? Am I helping them in? Am I supporting them when they get here? Are we doing everything we can?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, one of the things that we're talking about in the different phases of the career, the attraction and education, and the initial hiring and onboarding, the retention and development, the advancement and leadership, as well as alternative pathways, and then also things like returnships, and people, that women don't always have these linear career paths, and may need to step out for childcare, self-care, elder care, what have you, or in some cases leaving a toxic workplace. And when they're ready to come back in, they don't fit the profile, right? This level when you're in your 20s, this level when you're in their 30s, this level when you're in the 40s, right? You've aged out of being mentored, you've aged out of being eligible for some of those low, especially so many of the millennials have been quickly promoted up and then don't want to hire anyone older than them, right?
Well, and I will say there's one more thing, and this is probably not very popular either, but it's something that we don't talk a lot about in this industry. But there's are you too feminine or not feminine enough?
Yeah.
And do you look a certain way or don't look a certain way? And I think that is also challenging when you get to be a woman of a certain age, and women are still judged on appearances. So do you have to color your hair so your hair doesn't look gray? Because gray is cool when you're, a silver fox. But on women, it can be aged. It can be aging. And so I think as much as women of color are also judged by their appearance, and the crown effect, and just what all is part of that. And do you wear makeup or not enough makeup or too much makeup? Do you wear, heels, flats, pants, dresses? There are so many layers to being a woman, and being in an industry where all of that is just all kind of mushed. It's really hard to pick it apart and to know what is affecting your upward progression.
And I think part of it too, when we are working in water and the environment, unlike a lot of other STEM, it's also very public facing.
Yes.
And so there's like this hyper awareness of some people wouldn't join the summit because we need to check out the organization or the way you're running it or the software you're using or the whatever, how many people, whatever it is. And it's just like, we're trying to educate people, we're trying to reach people with some really important issues, and we're not run by some industrialist who gives a big family foundation grant or something like that this is very grassroots oriented, and but just that worry about any kind of scandal or worry about any kind of, well, not quite fit in or whatever, that I don't know, it's just a very cautious industry, and that caution can sometimes turn into, well, just in case somebody does something wrong, we just better not try it. Let's stick with the tried and true, right?
Well, and I will say, when I interviewed for one of my roles, I had somebody say, well, how would you handle working in a blue collar, predominantly male environment? And I said, well, fine, I've been working in it. Why would you, well, how would you handle, this, that, or the other? And what I was thinking, I didn't answer this way, but I was thinking, did you ask the men applying for this job that question? No, it would never have occurred. And in my mind, I was thinking, why would you ask? Why would you ask? The mere fact that you asked has then basically said you are identifying me in a certain way just because you asked me,
right.
And just like those other no conversations of how do you have childcare? Can you have night meetings? Can you, and I've been asked these questions, how would you handle this? What if your kids need to be picked up from school? I don't know. How does everybody else handle it? Right. But the mere fact that we get asked these questions almost puts us on notice that we're already singling you out as something else. And I think that women are much more, we know we had children. We know we have X, Y, and Z to take care of, or to deal with or to manage. Nobody needs to point it out. And yet it's surprising how even in this day and age, people still feel like they need to somehow ask us this question. And it's like, that should have gone the way of the dodo bird. I mean, like, those questions shouldn't even be on the radar. And if they're in your mind, you really need to look at yourself and say, why did this thought even cross my mind?
It is a double-edged sword, because there are women who are asking for time off, or asking for time to get their kids, or asking, and especially with some of the younger folks, it's almost it's like winning the battle and losing the war. That great, you got these concessions, but where's your career going to go? And that there's a commitment that's required in order to do this work, that we have to be on 24/7, or we have to be available for emergencies and that sort of thing. And so to be able to make sure that we're covering that, And if something comes up, if we have a pregnancy complication or a postpartum depression or whatever, that we need to be able to take care of ourselves. So, but the problem I see is when guys think they know the answer because they read some article on LinkedIn, or there's some study done by a sociologist that says, well, if we put childcare and lactation rooms on site at the utilities, that takes care of everything.
And I'm laughing because my bachelor's is sociology. So, but you're right. You're right. And the other thing is, it's this idea that if I do this thing, I like a Lego, right? I plop this thing in there and it fits. That's it. And it's that, no, it's an ever evolving issue. And each generation is different as well. So what was the ask or the need or the expectation for one generation, we shouldn't just automatically assume or make arrangements and then be surprised when that's not the case and that doesn't flow through. Not to mention different cultural backgrounds might value something else. And so that just shows that we have to be looking at and asking, what do you need? What are your expectations? And I think we can do that, but we have to get away from this mentality of it's always been done this way. This is the only way to do it. And I think the industry owes that to itself. And I think if we had more women who were involved in the discussion and developing it, these perspectives would naturally, organically come into the conversation and the problem solving.
Mm-hmm.
And because if we're all sitting around the table and we all look alike and act alike and have the same backgrounds, we're probably going to come at the problem the same direction. But it may not be the best or only way to do it. And the best way to get around that is to have lots of different perspectives being part of it. And yet we're not doing a very good job of that. And I think as far as going out and getting more women, I think we have to explain, why is this field conducive to women? How can women make it their own? And I think the benefit of that is talking about women in general like to feel a purpose. We want to know that what we're doing makes a difference. If I'm going to be away from my kids, my perspective, for people that don't have kids, maybe it's something else that they're away from. But for me, if I'm going to be away from my kids for 8 hours a day, I want to know that what I do matters. Because I'm making that choice. And I don't think there are too many things that matter more in sort of the world that we are in right now than clean and healthy water, a clean and healthy environment. But we don't really talk about that when we're hiring people, and we should. And I think if we did, people would connect with it better.
Yeah.
We talk about
aren't
that.
Passionate about what we do at this organization should count for something.
Well, and we
if it's
talk
someone who
about
says,
that.
I have a commitment to being in this field, that should count for something.
Well, and my mother was a nurse. And I remember when I was growing up, everybody said, oh, well, do you want to be a nurse? Ooh, no, that is the last thing I wanted to do. But it was like, but you want to do something like your mother's doing this thing and it's helpful, or do you want to be a teacher? And it's like, so there was already this thing of, you want to contribute, you want to be part of something. And I don't know why we are not going out and selling this career path for that very same thing. You are doing the good work of the environment. And I think that cause is what we should promote.
And I think we get a lot of women into these fields because of that. We get a lot of women who are, good at STEM fields who say, I don't want to just do pharmaceutical, work for some big pharmaceutical company or oil and gas or something. I want to work in water and the environment, do something good for the planet, and then come into an environment where they may not be welcome, right?
Yeah.
And that's tough, especially when you really do care about what you're doing and you want to, and that this is the best way to do it, and for those of us who have really strong skills in analysis, in science, in engineering, in math, and could be making these contributions, and yet because we don't look like what they're supposed to look like, because we don't talk the same way, or I look like the other engineers, or look like how the engineers think women should look.
One way or the other, you're sort of doomed on either side.
Right. That we can't be that that social person to take care of the social aspects that they don't want to deal with, or the team manager and the rah-rah person or whatever. And say, no, I want to do the engineering. I want to do the system analysis. I want to do the models. I want to do the project management. I want to do whatever, So, well, I think there's there's work to be done. And is your PhD, have you graduated? Is this?
I did. I finished last summer, and I am actually officially Dr. Marshall. And then I didn't know what to do with myself, right? After all that schooling, then I was like, what do I do with all that free time? So this is what I'm doing. I'm being interviewed and talking to people and stuff because I got to do something to fill that time.
Great. Well, you really contribute a lot to the profession and to the industry with, raising awareness on these issues. I hope that you got a good direction next in terms of, that somebody is going to appreciate everything that you have to offer, and is going to snap you up real quick, and that's, we need you in this field for sure.
Well, thank you for letting me talk.
Yeah. So, and for all of you watching, go ahead and type in the comments, in the chat, what have been your experiences? If you've been diagnosed as neurodiverse, have you tried to mask it? Have you tried to adapt? Have you tried to fit in? Have you asked for accommodations? Have you found a field where your differences are a strength? Have you found people to talk to? Have you found people to connect with? Are you managing people who may be neurodiverse? How are you seeing differences between men and women? And again, often they're presenting differently. Boys who are ADHD might be more on the hyperactive side, and girls might be a little more spacey or a little more chatty, and verbally active rather than running around, right? Women on the spectrum might try to overcompensate and try to act like the popular girls and act the way they think they're supposed to act, or may go into doing, becoming an operator so that they can be one of the guys, so they can be, act a little differently, and just be able to do it based on being able to do the work. So, it's definitely something to be aware of. It is a part of the picture, as part of this intersectionality aspect. And we're so lucky to have Dr. Beverli Marshall here to share with us, what is it like as someone who is neurodiverse working in water, and how can we as an industry do better to appreciate all the talents of the people who are in the field, and make sure that we're hiring really talented people who just might not fit the typical picture. So come on back for the rest of our time. Dr. Marshall, did you have any last thoughts that you wanted to share with people, or?
No, but thank you very much for having me, and I really appreciate it. And I think this whole summit is fantastic. because I think it helps people see that they're not alone, maybe with some of their challenges, but also gets people thinking, like, what, even me, like, what do I have preconceived ideas, and how do I get away from that?
Well, folks, keep watching before check out all the great talks we have, and we will see you again soon on the summit. Thanks so much for joining us for this extraordinary conversation, one of 45 extraordinary conversations we had as part of the Women of Water Get Real virtual summit, where we explored where and why women are leaking from the water career pipeline, how we can stop those leaks, and even bring women back to water. I hope that you will enjoy all of these amazing interviews. If you don't have a chance to watch all of them during the summit, you have the opportunity to join us with a power pack and get lifetime access to all the videos, as well as an opportunity to join us for 30 days in a brand new community where we will dig even deeper in live facilitated conversations about some of the issues that are facing women in water. Look forward to seeing you there. Please join us at watercitizen.org/women, watercitizen.org/women for more information. See you again soon.